Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on sociological research method, in today's lecture we are going to discuss on a qualitative research methodology, that is ethnography. Now, when we as researchers of qualitative data enter the field, we spend a qualitative time, that is say around 12 months or 24 months, trying to understand our field, that is everyday life of the respondent or the participants who are part of our research work. Now, in this is a long process and kind of requires a in-depth understanding of the everyday ways of living and the culture, their system, and that in itself kind of gives such a rich data which is then published as report, diaries or research report. And this entire explanation of ethnography as a research method has been explained very in detail in a book titled Ethnography Step by Step by David M. Fetterman. Now, this book introduces the novice researcher to the practice of ethnography research. It goes on in detail to explain what is the ethnography, what is the role of ethnographer, what are the types of ethnography, what are the challenges that we face as ethnographic researcher in the field, and therefore this is kind of a very important text to be read and understood both as a student as well as a researcher before going into the field. This book titled Ethnography Step by Step provides an overview of ethnography, a discussion of methods and techniques utilized in the field, a guide to the use of ethnographic equipment, and basic tenets of the process of analyzing data. In addition, it provides important strategies for writing up the result and a valuable discussion of ethics. So, it is a kind of not only something which we go to the field, do it and come back and it ends. Ethnographic research basically starts even before we go to the field. We need to understand our respondent, we need to understand the community where we are going to research, and once we have come back collecting our data, we need to kind of organize the data which has been collected. It needs to be analyzed, and this requires that we maintain a connection with the field, and therefore the process of ethnographic research is kind of elaborate. The method is almost a part of the researcher until and unless the final reports is submitted, and therefore it also kind of raises questions of ethic, because many a time we are studying subjective part of their personal life, their feelings, their emotions, and also studying certain area which kind of the respondent doesn't want to share with the public. So, there has to be an ethical means of collecting data as well as ethics in terms of publishing the data that we have collected from the individuals. So, we first begin with trying to understand what is ethnography. Now, here in this lecture, I am sticking specifically to the work of Fetterman. We can have multiple ways of explaining ethnography, but the task of this series is specifically to refer to the syllabi mentioned in the undergraduate NEP syllabus on sociological research method, and here the reading by Fetterman is one of the prescribed reading. So, according to Fetterman, ethnography is about telling a credible, rigorous and authentic story. Ethnography gives voice to people in their own local context, typically relying on verbatim quotations and thick description of events. So, one of the way of understanding ethnography as a qualitative research is to kind of not interfere with the respondents' understanding of the phenomena. It's almost reproducing what the respondent or the community is expressing about it. So, it can go in length in the first voice of the respondents. It's almost like telling a story, without any kind of the personal opinion of the researcher. So, the story is told through the eyes of local people as they pursue their daily lives in their own community. Ethnography is thus both a research method and a product, typically a written text. So, once your ethnography research is completed and you are about to produce a report or a book of it, it looks like a story. It should be viewed as a story, and it will tell you not the opinion of the researcher or not the opinion of a thinker, but the actual life of the community and through their own perspective, and that is why it's the method is known as ethnography. Now here Fetterman tells us some of the tasks of ethnography. What should an ethnographer do when he or she is in the field? So the ethnographer adopts a cultural lens to interpret observed behavior, ensuring that the behaviors are placed in a culturally relevant and meaningful context. The ethnographer is focused on predictable daily patterns of human thoughts and behavior. So, when one is reading the ethnography, one should be able to kind of create a picture through the ethnography of the community that is part of it and make sense of it. So, there is kind of a detailed thick description of everyday life, opinions, feelings, and that kind of is the role that is expected of an ethnographer. So, ethnographers are noted for their ability to keep an open mind about the groups or culture they are studying. However, this quality does not imply any lack of rigor. So, it is not that you are just in the field and observing and recording and going back and giving. It is not that it is absent of analysis. There is analytical thinking as well, but you have to be kind of going, the field is like a blank slate. So, there is no ideas inscribed in CU which needs to be taken and put on the mouth of the respondent. Let them speak, let them express, but then analyze according to the objective of the research. So, the ethnographer enters the field with an open mind, not an empty head. Before asking the first questions in the field, the ethnographer begins with a problem, a theory or a model, a research design, specific data collection techniques, tools for analysis, and a specific writing style. So, when Fetterman is explaining the components that is required for a researcher to carry on into the field, is in itself explaining that it's a rigorous methods. It's not kind of anyone just kind of observing any behavior and writing it as it is. So, it's not an empty head. You are going with certain kind of objective of research. So, you have a theory in mind, you have a research design, you have specific data collection methods, techniques, and all this are kind of to be knitted together to produce a rich ethnography. The ethnographer also begins with biases and preconceived notions about how people behave and what they think, as do researchers in every field. Indeed, the choice of what problem, geographic area, or people to study is in itself bias. So, the author is kindly telling us that when for the first time when we select a topic of research, when we decide to research, most of the time it is connected to a personal biography. Either we study a community or any part of an institution which we know well, which we are accustomed to or which we are part of. So, there is already a bias in right from the selection of the research problem. So, this bias cannot disappear. So, it is carried to the field. But the task of the ethnographer is to maintain a distance, you keep it away in the process of data collection and analysis. Here, Fetterman argues that biases in ethnography serves both positive and negative functions. Controlled biases can focus and limit the research effort. Uncontrolled, they can undermine the quality of ethnographic research. To mitigate the negative effects of bias, the ethnographer must first make specific biases explicit. A series of additional quality control such as triangulation, contextualization, and non-judgmental orientation places a check on the negative influence of bias. So, there is no denial that there is no bias. Bias is kind of integral. What is required is to first control it and then mitigate the negative consequences of the bias in ethnography. So, in order to kind of control this, there are certain quality control measure explicitly stating biases. The ethnographer must first identify and acknowledge their own bias. You have to be self-aware that there are certain biases, only then you will be able to kind of control it. Next is triangulation. Using multiple methods, data sources or theory to verify findings. So, the whole idea of triangulation is to balance out the biased understanding of a phenomena. Third quality control measure is contextualization, interpreting observations within the specific cultural or social context. Next measure is non-judgmental orientation, that is approaching the group or culture being studied without preconceived value judgment. Now, when you keep these quality control measures, the objective is to kind of collect a data which is kind of not affected by the researcher's bias and the personal understanding. So, ethnographic study allows multiple interpretation of reality and alternative interpretation of data. So, in social sciences, we know that there are multiple variations in terms of theoretical perspective. The same social reality can be explained from multiple perspectives, and the same set of data, if when interpreted by different set of researchers, can have different research conclusion. These contrast with the research methods that might seek a single objective truth. So, in social sciences, specifically sociology, the aim is not to discover truth, and therefore, there could be multiple ways in which the data can be interpreted and analyzed. A core goal of ethnography is to understand a social and cultural scene from emic, that is insider's perspective. So, the ethnography basically is going as an outsider to the field and bringing out the insider's view. So, this divide between the outsider and the insider has to be overcome by the ethnographer in order to present an emic view. The ethnographer aims to see the world as the people they are studying seeing it. The ethnographer plays the role both as a storyteller and a scientist, and therefore, it is kind of explaining everyday life. It's kind of, you're trying to weave a story of the everyday existence, but you're doing it with a objective mind, you're doing it in a scientific manner, and therefore, an ethnographer is both storyteller and a scientist. Now, you have a dual role. As an ethnographer, there is a dual role. Now, this dual role is crucial. The story is the narrative that captures the insider's point of view, while the science refers to the rigorous method used to collect and analyze data. The ultimate measure of a successful ethnography is how well the reader is able to understand the native's point of view. So, the objective of the research is not to bring across the researcher's perspective or how the researcher understands the point A, but a successful ethnography is when the reader who is unaware of a particular society or the community cultural life is able to understand kind of from the perspective of the insiders. So, this insider and outsider view kind of collapses because of the rich data that has been collected by the ethnographer, and that is why it's saying that this ethnographer is also a scientist. Now, the better the story told by the ethnographer and better the science, the closer the reader comes to this understanding. This reinforces the idea that the quality of the research is tied directly to its ability to convey emic perspective accurately and compellingly. So, you have to kind of ensure that there is a balance of the subjective understanding and an objective interpretation of the data. Next, Fetterman goes on to elaborate the steps involved in ethnographic work. The first steps, according to him, is problem and theory selection. The process begins with the ethnographer choosing a specific problem or topic and a theoretical framework to guide the study. Second, you need to develop a research approach. What is a research approach? It is a decision is made about whether to use a basic or applied research approach, which further shapes the project's goal and scope. Third, you need to develop a good research design. A research design is created to serve as a set of instructions outlining what the ethnographer will do and where they will go. So, the research design is basically the description of the field, where the research is going to be conducted, a description of what techniques of data collections are going to be used, the time framework, and how the entire explanation of the research technique is part of the research design. The fourth steps in ethnographic work, which is the kind of heart of the design, is the actual field work. So, you have a well developed research proposal, you have your theoretical model, you have a good research design, but what kind of data will come across, or whether it is going to be an ethnographic rich data, will depend on the field work. The field work is the actual kind of going to your area of study, spending a qualitative time, understanding the community from their perspective, and then kind of coming back with rich data. During this phase, that is the field work, the ethnographer uses fundamental anthropological concepts, data collection methods, and analysis technique. The fifth step of ethnographic work is equipment and instrumentation. The passage notes that the use of various pieces of equipment, including human instrument, which refers to the ethnographer's own self as a tool for observation and data gathering. Now, here when we talk about the tool, is basically trying to understand the role of the ethnographer, how the ethnographer is going to use the biases in a controlled manner, what kind of strategy is going to be applied to become an insider, the ethics that needs to be followed, and that is kind of the equipments that we basically do not have any kind of a physical equipment that we or instrument that we are going to refer here, but it is kind of a description of how the data is going to be collected. The sixth step of ethnographic research is analysis and product. Analysis is not a single final step, but an ongoing process that occurs at various stages, such in the field notes, interim notes, and memos. So, it's kind of analysis is not kind of leave it that, it's kind of different from quantitative data where we are kind of playing basically with numbers, and we collect a huge amount of numbers, subject it to analysis, and comes out at the average or statistics measure. Here, it's understanding the qualitative data. So, it's running through right from the time that you select a research problem to the final data report. This analysis is inbuilt into the process. So, if we follow these steps and kind of come out with our research report, which is the product, how do we understand a good ethnography? So, a good ethnography would be in terms of maintaining the central goal of ethnographic research, and that is understanding a social and cultural scene from the emic or insider's perspective. A good ethnography is one where the reader comes to understand this point of view, making the ethnographer both a storyteller and a scientist. A well-organized ethnographer can more easily manage the mountains of data they collect, such as field notes, voice recordings, photos, and survey data. So, you need to organize these data, because there is a kind of a whole set of data which is available, and you need to analytically kind of organize these data in order to kind of give it a shape, a report, or a story, and therefore organizing the data collection is important. This organization makes the daunting task of sifting through data much less overwhelmingly. So, when we are doing ethnographic research, it has to have certain loopholes. So, if we read a reader or the book, it seems as if it's kind of an easygoing task. However, an orderly structured ethnography is not always neat and tidy. It often involves serendipity, creativity, hard work, and most important, luck. The luck of the researcher comes very important, whether it kind of his or her luck is good enough to be able to the community to accept him as an insider. So, the author here, that is Fetterman, makes a point to convey the unplanned, sometimes chaotic and always intriguing character of the work, even while presenting it in an organized way. So, once we read this is ethnography, these are the steps, these are the precautions that we maintain, it seems that it's an easy go task, but it's not. It's kind of more chaotic when the researcher enters the field. So, this nuance provides a more complete and honest picture of what it's like to conduct an ethnographic research. Now, next he comes out to the understanding the important task of ethnographic research is to be able to identify a research problem. So, the ethnographic research starts with defining a problem or topic of interest. This research problem is the driving force behind the entire project, shaping the research design, budget tools, and how the findings are presented. The way an ethnographer defines the problem reflects the research orientation, either basic or applied. The problem itself can suggest which research approach. There are several research projects like ethnographic, survey, experimental. So, the problem, what you are going to study, will define what kind of a approach you are going to adopt, whether it is going to be a case study or survey or ethnographic study. So, thus analysis is not separate step, but an ongoing process throughout the research. Now, when we are kind of have a research, we have been able to define a research problem, the next important task is application. So, researcher can address a problem such as an unequal minority representation in higher paying and higher status occupation in the United States. This is an example which Fetterman gives in order to see how you apply your ethnographic research. So, here he says that a survey approach would probably be more efficient than an ethnographic approach in determining the number of ethnic groups in specific occupation. Why a survey? Because here the objective is to understand the numbers. So, the survey will help you to understand how many ethnic groups in specific occupation throughout the United States. Now, if we were to take a descriptive approach, that is ethnography, however, it would be most useful to study how unequal representation in specific occupation comes about. So, here the objective is not to study how many, but how the particular problem has come to be a part of the particular society. So, here when we apply a descriptive approach, we will try to understand how inequality as a social phenomena has become a part of a developed, say, higher work population, specifically here referring to the United States, where you have inequality in the form of racism. And then most important is to understand the perspective of the people, that is, what people are thinking about this inequity. So, the numbers are not important. It is accepted that inequality is a part of the United States society, which is developed, which is economically well off, yet there is a problem where racism comes into the picture. So, ethnographic data is kind of not interested in numbers. They are not, the question is not how many, but the most important question is how or why. So, we need kind of define the research problem, that is we have a statement, and the statement is the research objective. So, the definition of what is going to be researched is important. So, the problem must precede the selection of a research method to avoid trap of having a method in search of a problem. A situation referred to as methodological tail wagging the research dog, a situation that produces frustrating and imprecise research. So, we need to be very careful whether the objective has to be very clear, the problem to be studied has to be cleared. Once the problem is identified, the method to be used is clear, and once you have your method as qualitative research, then you have to follow the task of ethnography, and then the product is a good ethnography. So, order to get understanding of this ethnography as a research method, read Fetterman, Ethnography Step to Step Guide. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.